We are going to get started with our February 7th policy meeting. And again, we're starting at 3:45, a few minutes late. We have two policies for our first readings, and the first one is policy 521, student disability non-discrimination.
Yes, and so we are bringing this policy forward for review. It's one of the policies that is within our students area after 500 series, and so we're just bringing this forward with minor modifications for adoption, as it's one of the annual policies that need to be reviewed and adopted. This policy is to protect students with disabilities, as indicated, for non-discrimination. Any questions or?
So there weren't any huge modifications on this one, right?
Not at all.
And just background too, we updated it 9/17/19, and then again October 2020.
That's correct.
And then again, it's one of our mandatory policies that to look at every year.
That's correct.
The address of our district
Yes.
has changed, which is one of the few minor changes.
So section 3 there, where it has the coordinator and persons who have questions or comments, that is changed to this address, and then Anthony Bosch.
That's correct. Like you shared before with the board, there are just a handful of policies that have a specific person named in the policy, and this is one of them.
And just while we're in this section, so this is section 500, and this is where there's a number of different student policies that we review, many that are mandatory, that they're reviewed once a year. So this falls into that. Some we've already reviewed this year, but and as we kind of continue between now and July 1st, as we talked about, we'll be looking at other policies in this section 500. Yeah.
So is there any other change on here?
No.
Superintendent bonds other than the address and then your name?
Correct. No other changes. And we did review the MSBA policy to make sure there were not any adoptions or modifications, and there have not been any updating of the policy itself. So again, this is just one of those annual policies, and I think our families who have students with disabilities should be encouraged that the district continues to review policies, and in this one specifically, making sure that they are protected from non-discrimination or from discrimination.
So within the last, 2-3 years, we haven't had any other issues come forward from families where we're missing something here?
No, not that I'm aware of that has been reported.
Is there any way we can, on the coordinator in section 3, put in the new address and/or just leave the assistant superintendent's name off of there? So I mean, the contact would be the assistant superintendent. Although, I mean, we're going to have to correct this then by the end of the year, right?
Yeah, and we actually did talk about this in our policy planning meeting, that we may, at that time, we actually move into the building, and that we could probably do a sweep with all of the policies, but.
Correct.
Then you have a permanent address, and then
Right.
contact would be that phone number.
Yeah.
Correct.
Although the email address would change.
Like I shared earlier, but I'm pretty confident this is one of those. Meaning there's a handful of policies that you have to have a named person in the policy.
Okay.
Right, a named person or position. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it could be the CFO, or it could be the HR director. Depends on the policy.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments on that one? Okay. So this will have a second reading on
March 7th.
March 7th. And then the next policy, policy 541, this is our gender inclusion policy. And again, NSB does not have a policy, so this policy was reviewing the other policies from around the state, including Rochester, Buffalo. There was a number of different, maybe about 8 to 10 different school districts that have a policy, and it was vetted by our attorney as well after it was put together by our administrators. So do you want to speak towards this policy?
Yes, I would like to share something, and actually I will bring up our coordinator, Jacob Laurent, who's going to also provide some background information regarding the genesis of the policy, at least in terms of conversations that occurred that led to the development policy being presented at this point in time. And I do want to say that I'm really proud of the fact that we are, as a district, bringing this policy forward. As one of the things that, as a district, we have stated is that we are committed to equity in all its forms. And one of the things that we heard loud and clear from all of the stakeholder conversations that we've had with our students, not only the stakeholder conversations that occurred in Marnita's table, but also the stakeholder conversations that occurred when we engaged in strategic planning and listening to our students. And through the sharing and feedback from our students, there was often comments related to gender, especially students who are gender fluid, indicating that that they also want to have really great experiences in school, that they had some concerns regarding how they are being treated or welcomed and how they are being included in school in any kind of successful way. That information was really critical, and actually that information was being gathered as this committee was actually probably having conversations regarding gender inclusion. So I want Jake to share just the process that went into the research behind other school districts and why the committee was formed and how we came to this policy. Then I'll talk about what we've done in turn as a district to seek feedback from other stakeholders, including our principals and others.
Thanks for having me here. Appreciate it.
Jacob, just for purposes of this being recorded, would you go over your title and that?
Sure. I am Jake Laurent, climate coordinator. It's a district role. And so this work was spearheaded by, this is my third year in this role, and kind of the amount of support asked by principals in regards to how do we handle this at times, and what is our messaging to kids and families if a student identifies as a different gender than they are born as. I think that's one part of it. The other part being what Anthony said is the equity part, and we're a public school and we take all kids as they come to us. And our job is to support them and have them be as successful as possible. And so we started a task force. It's mixed between community and school personnel. A couple notables on there is we've worked with Lutheran Social Services and Kathy Herms, who has done a plethora of work and guidance at time as we kind of navigate a tough topic. And another one would be Out Front. They're out through Minneapolis. And so we wanted to make sure that, one, as we started this journey, who has policies on this? What does that really mean? And even for me, until I was in this role, I also was not even aware of what the state laws were, and I was a dean of students. And so a lot of this is rooted in statute and law. So as our team kind of processed this and looked at what was missing for our kids to have a similar experience as their peers, one was a policy supporting them, no matter which building they're in. Just being in this role, it's certain schools have more experience with this, and especially our secondaries that have been working through this for a while. Another part was professional development, and what can we do to train up our staff. And so we, for November 7th, professional development, did do an hour-long training for all of our staff. And really the main goal of that was to make them aware of the state statute and laws, but also some best practice, some local data of how this group is impacted in the Duluth community. And I think the best part was, what could you do tomorrow as a staff member?
What date was that again?
November 7th.
That was just last year.
Yep.
That was the beginning of our
Yeah, it's a couple
staff
months ago.
development on this
Mhm.
channel.
Yep.
These issues. Thank you.
And I think we've touched on it to some degree in other work related to, culturally responsive practices and different biases that exist, but this was one of the first more explicit focuses through PD, correct?
Yep. And I believe our last time we had a training was with Kathy Herm's help. It was 2015, 2016. It mainly looked at pronouns. And once we started realizing how many staff no longer work here that worked here in 2015, 2016, we saw this as a refresher, but also that next step of working with educators. They want, what can I actually do? What's tangible? Don't always give me this umbrella oversight. What could I do in my classroom that are simple asks that can make my classroom more inclusive? And so that was a undertaking, and the feedback was really positive in regards to that. I believe it was about 90% found it at least somewhat beneficial to most beneficial. Going through the policy writing is definitely more challenging, and we had multiple drafts in regards to that. We did end up finding an MSBA draft, and that is what some of the backbone of this is.
Did you look at other districts that are ahead of us on this?
Yes. So that was our first step, was looking at other districts, and after that we were directed to what does MSBA have, and we ended up finding a draft through MSBA. It's non-published, but it's a draft. And that's where we started kind of realizing, St. Paul was one of the pioneers in this. That was 2015. And then really most of these schools that we reviewed are within the last year. So 21, 22, in regards to that.
And I believe there's only about 8 to 10 districts that have a gender inclusion policy.
I don't know a fully comprehensive list. I probably have looked through about 50 schools. I'd say kind of a trend is, north of Forest Lake, this is not common. South of Forest Lake, this is more common. And a lot of times you'll see kind of a statement instead of a policy. And so a good amount of our Twin City sister schools have a statement of support or some sort of verbiage like that. And the ones I believe that I shared last week are ones that have more of the overall kind of written policy in regards to it. And again, we're mainly highlighting state statute and laws, but also some kind of best practice for inclusiveness with all of our kids. And that was kind of how we navigated this with that team and finding areas where we could move this work forward, because I think some of the data speaks that there is a group of our students that don't feel like school is inclusive for them.
I was just going to say that part of our rationale as an administration for bringing forward a policy like this to the board is also because if something is in statute, you could do something with a guideline, or you could do something with a statement of support or something like that, but we felt that it was important to make sure that this was memorialized in policy, so that, because it's the right thing to do, to make sure that your phone is off, and also make sure that future boards and future administrations, that they have this guided in policy rather than just a simple guideline. I mean, there's a lot. It's a statement of support. Sorry.
Jacob, I really appreciate that you brought together, LSS, and particularly Kathy Herms, who's done a lot with us on other policies in the past as well, and then up front Minnesota. When you were looking at the different district policies, some policies, I believe, were even more specific than ours in terms of some areas. And so is there some thought on what you put into this policy? I mean, not going as specific.
Yeah, I think as a team, even before that professional development, knowing we had that hour secured, and this is how this continues to evolve, is if it's in policy, then we have to have staff that are trained to know what to do, and we have to stand behind that policy. And so that's where some of it has altered at times. And since that PD, we're able to include more things back into it. I think with professional development being so fresh, and we want this to be as good as our word, right? These are things that we know we can do well moving forward. And so that's what's in here right now. To me, like anything I work on should be a live document. Granted, we have to go through a process, but if this looks exactly the same in 20 years, right, we're probably doing something wrong. And I think of that in a lot of our practices. So this should evolve as we evolve, and kind of continue to voice what we can do in writing as well as through action. So it's gone through a lot of variations. I also know it's, and I think you're going to speak more on that later, kind of the process with that. But I also know we've had, lawyers look at this and as well, and making sure that this is something that we can adhere to completely. We're a pretty large district, and so thinking of that each paragraph in here, that every school you walk into, we can do this. And so that's kind of the area we're working on now. What are some of these nuances that we need to get figured out? And right now some of that focus is on those non-gendered bathrooms. And so tomorrow I'm working with elementary principals to do some more finalization of that.
So you envision, and then Anthony, I know you want to move on, you envision that we would bring this policy back to expand it or change it, as we feel like we are able to do more?
Yeah, I think so. I think that should be all of our practice.
Yeah,
That's continuous improvement. And, this has been a tremendous amount of work for a team that didn't get extra bucks for it or anything else. It was out of seeing the need for this and working with kids that have really struggled. And in some cases due to our actions, and sometimes of not knowing,
Right.
So through that PD and through this, that not knowing piece can be erased.
So not knowing, so what is absent though is the fact that, as you already know, some policies come with some guidelines or they may come with regulations. What we have not done is mapped out any guidelines or regulations related to the policy itself. So my hope is that with regards to modification of this policy in itself, I'm hopeful that the state actually, or MSBA actually drafts a model policy that districts can then adopt and modify instead of districts having to create their own policies. So that's my hope and dream, is that MSBA comes up with a model policy. That's one. With regards to the regulations or guidelines, that's something that as a district, we are going to have to work on to provide guidance for our staff regarding how they are to enforce these policies or what practices they should be engaged in to make sure that these expectations are being met. Including professional development, like what kind of professional development would be needed for staff in any one of these areas to make sure that staff feel comfortable and confident that they are operating and practicing in ways that is not discriminatory or that doesn't support students or cause further seclusion of students. And so we know that as a district we're going to have to work on those things over the next few years to make sure we have a solid regulation and expectations in place.
I just had
Member Sadler?
I just had a quick comment. Again, I'm glad we're moving forward on this. Chair Lawford and I attended one of the closing sessions on this topic, and it is a challenging topic and policy to get right and move forward on. But again, it's the kind of policy that not only can save district issues with lawsuits, or if we don't have one, the district's exposed with lawsuits, but it also saves lives. And I think that's the reason why you move forward on something like this, because we're dealing with student groups that are dealing with a lot of challenges as they kind of work their way and learn their way through life as to who they are, what they are, and how they want to live their lives.
Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you for bringing that up about the regulations, because that's kind of where, as you know, that's kind of where my brain went, is I think this is a great draft of a policy, and I really appreciate you saying, you know, yep, this can change moving forward as we learn and as we implement procedures and regulations. We can always strive to get better. And I do believe that we can do these things as a district, and I think it's really important that we do these things. My mind went to just kind of the day-to-day, okay, how do we make that happen, like with the name change form? You know, I've had several families reach out to me, Amber, where can I find this form? So just things like that, like this is where you can find the form, this is who you take it to, or on that first day of middle school and your kid is non-binary and they want to use the gender-neutral bathroom, just knowing that procedure for that, this is so that is communicated to the parents and the child. And then I'm really glad that you talked about the professional development on November 7th and are thinking about that kind of moving forward, because you know, this could be a change for some of our staff, and I think it's really important that we have clear staff expectations, and along with that, you know, professional development for them so they feel supported in this work as well. And then Member Sandholm, thank you for bringing up just that this is also supporting students' lives in a lot of cases. I kind of have up the trevorproject.org right now and just pulled up some stats from there. They do a survey every year. This is the 2022 National Survey on LGBTQ mental health. And just to state a few, you know, fewer than 1 in 3 transgender and non-binary youth found their home to be gender affirming. So when we think about that, fewer than 1 in 3 found their home supporting. So we need to make sure that our public schools are a place where they can be authentically themselves. And then there's a lot of other stats on here too. I'd be curious to look at some of the stats that you were referencing from the district. Could you share those with the board?
If you want, we have that professional development recorded.
Okay.
And share the video.
And there's about 5, we see a good chunk of the task force is presenting on that. And so that was all done internally in regards to the video production, so it's pretty, I was proud of it. It was a very proud moment just because of the months of work involved. Another part, we did create a gender and sexuality resource hub, and that was shared with all staff following that training. And so that has links to stuff like the Trevor Project. It also has some community resources, and then for many of our sites, someone in that building that could be a direct line for a resource. And so that again is a live document that's meant to keep growing. There's also gender support plans, a toolkit that's created by MDE, and so we're hoping, and then that name change form in there too. And so we're trying to get that so the resources are all in one spot and that it can continue to grow. And maybe it's just because I love hubs, but I find them as a spot that people can add to, and so it doesn't rely on, let's call Jake, right? And it kind of creates some more of that internalness with it. So I can share that with y'all too if you want. I can share both if that's
Can we just get t-shirts made up that say, let's call Jake? Yeah.
Member Loughlin,
Yeah,
then
so,
Superintendent.
a question, the Gender and Sexuality Resource Hub, great, I love hubs too. Is that something that could also be shared for families?
It's a thought. Yeah, I'd say that product choice would be above my position, but it's definitely there. It's mostly hyperlinks in there. But it's basically all the things that I was sharing with individual schools when they're asked for help. And that plan is really good because it engages the stakeholders and everyone knows there's a lot of nuances. And so instead of, oh, we gotta think of this. Oh, they're going on a school trip, now we gotta think of this. It's all could be kind of pre-done. Because you don't need to have that family in every week to problem solve something else.
Right.
So that was much more beneficial. This will kind of solidify that process more moving forward. I can share that with you all tonight if you want.
I think when we're doing important work that sometimes is a little bit pioneering into an area related to ethics, I think it's important that we handle this very carefully. And I mean that from a standpoint of wanting to make sure this gets implemented well. Having had conversations with Trans Northland, having had some pretty extensive conversations, Mr. Bonds and I attended the Regional Gay Straight Alliance, to hear student experiences and parent experiences. I think that in general, there's a sense in the communities that they don't want us to push this so hard that it causes a lot of negative fervor too. We want to make sure that we're bringing this forward in a way that's supportive as we would for anybody, and that we're very thoughtful in the way that we do that. But I do think it's to be celebrated as well, because we're being more inclusive. But the thing that I'm hearing as well, a couple of things. One is that this won't instantaneously switch our system so that we are in complete compliance with what we hope for here. Our bathrooms need work. We know that the single stall restrooms are sometimes misused, and that causes an area of discomfort. I know from conversations with parents that sometimes, even if we have a policy where we allow a transgender student to participate on an athletic team for the gender with which they're aligned, that even though policy might permit something, culture sometimes can be oppressive and superseding, and so we have to work on how do we change the culture around these things too, so that it's fully supportive. And I think that's just as important as policy. And I would also go so far as to say that some of our staff have even expressed concern about this and opposition to this based on the training. And it's important for us to really carefully think about how we're going to work through those situations so that they can be learning and growing opportunities rather than clashing opportunities to the degree possible. And another note related to how this will develop over time, I know that the legislature is considering various bills. One such bill would be Representative Kozlowski put forward a bill to have additional funding for schools to change the bathrooms to make them more gender inclusive. And their bill is something that they shared with us so that we could take a look at it and consider what would this mean for us, and look at it from a facilities perspective and look at it from an internal perspective, and then share that feedback with them related to the bill. So I think it's exciting work, it's interesting work, there is potential peril in the way that we have to thread the needle on this. We have to make sure that we're not just creating hostile situations that make it worse for the very people that we're trying to create more inclusion for. But I think it's important for us to do this brave work. So I'm very grateful for what we're doing here. But it's something that I think we need to continue to stay focused on. And with that, I was thinking about the resource hubs, making sure that those resource hubs are thoughtfully curated, because sometimes with all things, whether we're looking at Black History Month hubs and other things like that, making sure that links are live and also making sure that the resources are relevant to current best practice and not maybe referring people in a direction we don't want to go is something that I think is, if we have a resource hub, we need to make sure that we're thoughtfully curating it as well. Not making it, generic, but making sure that it's going to keep us moving in positive directions.
It definitely sounds like, Jacob, that you really looked at this comprehensively. And I think when I go back to that session that Member Sandholm and I went, where we heard from a couple other school districts, both from school board members, a student, and staff, that making sure we're covering, comprehensively all these different areas like you have already was really key to it being successfully implemented. And also just making sure what we say we're going to do consistently. And that was my kind of takeaway from that session.
I mean, and the challenges out there, there's things you just can't think of. And one of the things that was brought up that should be part of staff development was when a sub's in the classroom. And you think about the normal procedure. I guess myself with some experience, you check in at the office, and then you get class rosters or get some information for taking attendance, and really, that can be a problem if a sub comes in and isn't using an up-to-date CD chart and class roster with class, the names that the students would prefer to be used while they're in there. So teachers need to be aware that if you're having a sub come in, make sure the sub knows, look, here's the roster, here's the CD chart, these are the names that my students prefer to be referenced by. I mean, there's you can't. There's so many things out there that you just can't think of everything. And that's there's a learning process here, and there's a lot of education that needs to go on within our own staff and through staff development, but with the community and essentially.
Agreed.
Great board.
Especially when you said the community, because you can think of there are all kinds of scenarios where we have all kind of athletic events or performances, and there are opportunities where there's interactions that may not be positive if there isn't community awareness and the community doesn't understand that someone identifying a certain way is allowed to use the facility that they select, right? And so it's one of those situations where we have to make sure that our community is well informed as well and understand what we do here in Duluth.
On the plus side, we do live in the city with maybe the biggest pride festival in the state of Minnesota, if not the region. And again, I think we do have a community that is open-minded and welcoming.
From what I've heard from neighboring districts too, that some, when we think about like what's north of, did you say Forest Lake? It's important for bigger districts that have a more supportive community to sometimes step forward and start pioneering these things so that it can be spread to other smaller districts that might have a less inclusive minded population too. So I think that's how change happens. So I think it's important for Duluth to be brave, not just for our own students, but also for those in neighboring communities.
We've talked a bit about the professional development. How about, what are some ways we're going to educate our student population on this policy?
And we will be discussing this further with our principals and other leaders to have that, that discussion. Should the policy be adopted or approved, then we're going to start the plan of make sure there's thorough communication up and down the organization for all our leaders, our staff, and then how do we educate our students around policy as well, including our families. So we're going to develop a plan for that.
Board members, any other comments or thoughts? We've kind of just been jumping in, but that's okay too.
I just found a couple minor wordsmithing things. So in section 3, the second paragraph, so under official school records, second paragraph, says at the request of a transgender or gender nonconforming student in all grades, the district will use the student's preferred name, gender identity, and preferred pronouns when referring to the students in education records. And then the next sentence is at the request of the parent of a transgender student. I think it should say transgender or gender nonconforming student in any grade there. I'm just wondering if we could combine these, or why we say it twice when we could just say in the beginning at the request of a transgender or gender nonconforming student or their parents or something like that. You see what I'm saying? We're saying the same sentence twice. So just a thought to look at there, if it could be
And or.
and or their parents. It would get rid of a whole sentence. It's the same sentence, it's just saying students and their parents.
I like shorter policy.
And then I just want to make sure that we have, I think the second sentence doesn't have or gender nonconforming and the first one does. So just making sure, I think it's
Yeah.
to have both. And then if you look at section 4, student names, pronouns, and gender markers, again, it just says at the student's request a transgender student in all grades, blah, blah, blah. I think it should be transgender or gender nonconforming student in section 4. Should probably have both, because then I went back and I looked at the terminologies, and since the terminologies, the definitions are different, I want to make sure that everyone's included in that.
And that can turn into an and or.
And or.
With the next sentence as well, couldn't it?
So your suggestion for section 4, it's because I know Patty's feverishly writing, at the student's request, a transgender student, you're saying transgender and
or gender nonconforming student.
And we could also, as we did with the previous sentence, or the previous area, say, at the student's and or parents' request,
Yeah,
transgender nonconformance, because that gets rid of the next sentence.
yeah, just to be consistent.
now you open up the door on.
Yeah, I have to
Now I see
read
the
it.
parent now, my line goes to family, right? So I'm trying to think of.
Or I go to caregiver.
Is it caregiver, guardian? I'm trying to also think
Yep.
of legally what would is considered
How about the parent?
person that has
Parent
the-
or guardian?
parent or guardian.
Yeah, just little things
Sounds good.
that I caught there. And then I had one more. This is not a big deal, we don't have to change it, under dress code, section 8. I'm wondering if we need such as dances, after-school activities. We can keep it, it's not a big deal. You could just end it at school-sponsored functions, period. Otherwise, I would like to add, if people thought, or I would just suggest, including but not limited to dances, after-school activities. I actually had someone I know in our schools who kind of actually bumped up against this recently, so.
We'll look at that.
So,
We will look at that one as well.
I don't mean to open a whole huge can of worms, but some of the things we're talking about here are student specific. Is this the time that we also want to make it inclusive of staff as well?
I think one of even just going through that professional development, the amount of staff that reached out to me or a team member in regards to that, I think, can you help me navigate how do I come out to my staff? Because I've been hiding this since I worked here. So I think they felt like this was fully inclusive with them.
I guess I'll make a recommendation that we will go back and look and see if we can make sure, because even the first
First sentence.
sentence states, students and staff of Duluth Public Schools
Yeah.
deserve respect. So-
It tells what different laws regarding employees compared to
True.
students.
This is a 500 series.
for our students, so
Yeah, it is for
It does say
students.
yeah.
it says, yeah, it does say student staff, but this is a 500 series which covers students, not
Students.
employees. And so we
Yeah.
need to,
Wouldn't staff?
let us think through that a little bit and connect with the lawyer
Yeah, we
again
don't have a
on it
staff
because.
dress code anyway.
Sorry.
I'm just saying, staff
we
are
have-
protected by state law. Whatever non-discriminatory practice.
Correct.
I mean, so I don't.
And there are
Under
some-
the non-discrimination
And-
policy that we have.
Do we have other policies that are specifically addressing staff?
Yes,
We do.
yes.
And they're covered, some of them cover both.
So we would probably want to go back and check, do we have anything in our staff policies related to dress code that we might want to consider changing to be more, potentially,
Agreed.
so that there's alignment.
I guess that would be something that I would suggest we move forward as a next step or
Yep.
follow through on. As it relates to this policy, we will, I guess I would make the recommendation that we can look at the policy that we currently have. We connect with our attorney to see if there are aspects of it that could connect to staff, and then we will either add staff as part of this. If not, then we will present it simply as for our students, knowing that we will then circle back to a policy or policies that address staff.
In this section that we were talking about here, I like the version that Amber mentioned, where it still mentions these specific things like dances and after-school activities, but you said something like
Including but not limited to.
including but not limited, but giving the specifics. I think that's important, that's in there. And then, can you, when you make these changes, do it in a way we can tell what was changed? Okay,
Red line.
yeah, redlined it, yeah.
You might want to share your, Member Sadowski, you might want to share your copy with me. Since you've got it, I don't know.
Oh, that I wrote on?
Yeah, you could share your copy. with
Oh,
me,
absolutely.
Or you can get an email, your email covered some of that, didn't it?
It wasn't as specific, but.
And then also
It
any,
wasn't specific.
Kathy's also capturing any suggestions right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then I can share it with the committee to see if I can still.
Yeah, I'm happy to copy this and scan it.
Is there any other, I'm just looking at the time for our next meeting, are there any other suggestions or comments? Again, this is our first reading.
Not at this time. In terms of legal references, at the very bottom, you'll see all of the various statutes that protect students, and some of them protect staff, whether it's the Minnesota Human Rights Act, Title IX, sexual harassment, violation, bullying. There are a host of policies that provide students with protection, and so this policy just will reinforce again and highlight that as a district we value equity, and in this case, gender equity. And we're proud of that.
Means that we're moving forward.
And thank you, Jacob, for being here today.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and I just want to thank the task force that put so much of their time into this.
We share that, this is really good.
I will email them tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks for the time.
If you could CC us so that we could also make sure that we inclusively praise the policy.
Sounds good.
Thank you again for your leadership, Jacob. Thank you, Anthony. So that is both of those policies then, 521, 541, will go into the second reading in March, and we'll have the revisions for our February 28th meeting. Okay. Okay,
Thank you.
anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.